Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some Hello Future Me. I've watched a couple of his writing videos before, specifically his on-world building series in regards to Empire. But today we are going to take a look at him talking about hard world building versus soft world building, specifically a study of Studio Ghibli. Now, I don't believe I've really ever heard the term hard world building versus soft world building, but I'm getting the vibe that it's probably somewhat similar to how you use the term in when it applies to magic, where the rules of the magic system aren't all that explained, making it a soft magic system where kind of anything can happen. The most popular example of a soft world build, a soft magic system would be Lord of the Rings, right? Where we're not really sure the scope of Gandalf's powers, but he's able to do things now and again, right? That's essentially, I think, the most prominent, best example of good soft magic because, right, it doesn't, not at any time does Gandalf's power seem to break our understanding or really make us question the story and the writing behind it, right? Um, my dog is barking at something. I don't know what. Hard magic system, right, would be Brandon Sanderson is, I think, definitively the most famous person when it comes to hard magic system, right? Where it's almost like a science, of like the magic is essentially science within the world. Now I lean more towards soft magic system, um, but I don't know whether or not I will lean harder versus soft um, world building here. I'm thinking if it's what I'm kind of getting the vibe of what it could be is I'm probably more of a hard world builder. I mean, let me show you guys. Like here's over 100 pages of front to back handwritten history stuff for one kingdom, one part of the world, essentially. Because that is what I enjoy writing a lot. I enjoy world building in that regard. I enjoy the historical element of it. Surprise, surprise, I studied history. But yeah, anyways, all that yapping. Let's go ahead and hear Hello Future Me's argument here or whatever.
What is it that makes a Studio Ghibli film so enchanting? Undoubtedly, it's the stunning visuals and complex characters,
I was just gonna say the visuals.
but it's also the worlds crafted through Hayao Miyazaki's unique vision. Fantasy and science fiction writers have long distinguished between hard and soft sci-fi, as well as hard and soft magic systems. But I want to expand on these ways that we look at the fantasy and science fiction genres by contrasting two very different methods for crafting different types of worlds and stories that immerse the reader in different ways. And it helps explain why J.K. Rowling's clarifications, let's call them, fall flat. This is an essay on hard world building and soft world building, co-written by myself and my friend Ellie Gordon. See, world building isn't just creating a fictional world in the abstract. It's also about what you consciously choose to convey to the reader or viewer in the text. You world
Yes.
build as you write. That's what builds the world that they know. At one end of the spectrum, the textbook example of hard world building is probably J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien created Elvish with not just random words translated from English, but a whole alphabet, phonetics, grammar, its own syntax. Gondor and
Hold
Rohan
on, I've never seen the alphabet like this. I've tried looking it up, but what the fuck am I? What?
Gondor and Rohan have complex and detailed histories, and Tolkien goes out of his way to communicate those things to the reader throughout the story. Hard world building is about immersion through giving the reader or viewer detailed, logical, and even realistic cultures, languages, geography, and elsewise, with
Okay, so I am a hard world builder.
an eye for how they all work together. This is probably the style that you're most familiar with, and it goes back to authors like Arthur C. Clarke writing stories that take account of time dilation across space, or how sound and matter travels through space when creating his worlds. The style of world building is aimed at immersing the reader by placing them in a world as believable and grounded as possible with its own web of logic. And it works. It allows the reader to more easily visualize the world you create and buy into the more fantastical elements that you introduce. It's a great way to craft a world. What then is soft world building? In the absolutely beautiful Studio Ghibli film Spirited Away, 8 million spirits bathe at Yubaba's bathhouse in the middle of an endless ocean made by rain, with a train running through it like an artery. And about halfway through the film, Yubaba detects something terrible approaching. A monolithic spirit with a foul stench arrives, and Shishiro has to clean it herself. As she's doing it, she finds what she calls a thorn in its side, and after pulling it out, a mass of disgusting rubbish and rot fills the room. A being they call the river spirit then emerges from the water, leaving behind gold as payment, and they treat it with great reverence, almost worship-like, before it rushes off. It's a subtle scene for world building, but it's defined by how little Miyazaki actually tells us. Miyazaki leaves it up to the viewer to imagine and interrogate just why what happens in this scene happens. The river spirit is only cured when Shishiro pulls out the masses of trash hidden inside it. From this, we imagine a world where spirits are corrupted by the waste of mankind, hence why the first thing we see pulled out is a bicycle. We could go even further and tie this to how they hate the smell of humans, a major point earlier in the film. And we see later on that the healing bud that the river spirit leaves behind has some loosely defined power, and no clear logical world-building connection is ever drawn between the river spirit and that bud. Finally, we can infer from how they treat the spirit with a reverence of sorts, if only fleetingly, that there is some kind of social hierarchy to the spirits that we never see explored beyond this. Yubaba's social place as a sorcerer among spirits is never truly explained, and no justification is given for the bizarre way spirits look and sound.
But I think I'm gonna be I might be disagreeing with Hello Future Me here, because to me that's like right. So one of the issues here with this sort of essay, right? And like I'm not at all like saying it's a weak argument or whatever. I'm just saying like one of the flaws with the comparisons that we have been given so far. If he does provide another, like, obviously he used the Lord of the Rings movies, but the Lord of the Rings movies have the books as background, right? As part of their world building and whatever. I would like to see what I would like to see is I would like to see him compare Studio Ghibli world build soft what he argues as soft world building versus a movie franchise that is only another movie only franchise, right? Uh Another visual medium only sort of thing that falls into the hard worlding space that does not come from a book. Um Though of course I wonder if he will be talking about Wizard of Earthsea, which was adapted by Studio Ghibli. Now, what I'm trying to argue here is the visual medium has a lot less to work with, and typically those kinds of things that he is questioning here don't get answered, in my opinion, and what I am familiar with, in most movies visual mediums, because they do not have the time to dedicate towards really explaining it, nor is it necessary for the story being told. Now, I have not watched Spirited Away in a really long time. I have not watched a Studio Ghibli movie in a really long time, so I do want to add that as context for here, that if my arguments here are perhaps a little weak, that could be why. So if I get things wrong, please feel free to correct me. But essentially, like, what I remember really of what Spirited Away is, like, essentially the theme of what is being told in the story, those questions that he's asking is not important. Um, and it's sort of like we see that happen in books as well that he seemingly would call hard world building. There are like single line references or whatever in like Lord of the Rings, seemingly alluding to, or like a description of a thing which alludes to something deeper that the audience has to fill in. That is present in Lord of the Rings, I think, plenty of times. Um, so, but Tolkien does not expand on them, even though Tolkien probably would have loved to expand on them further. And there are certainly plenty of times in Tolkien's work where he does expand on things that are not necessarily important to the story being told at hand. That's just how Tolkien was. But like, you know, right? There, like this argument here. So this bit here, those questions, I don't think really help the argument for soft world building. But we still have a lot of time left, so giving him
like the hopping
room.
lantern, and the setting is all intentionally peculiar and unconventional, and it's beautiful.
But it is consistent internally, I think, right?
In 2002,
Which would, I think, personally make it hard world building if it is consistent internal. And I mean, even the magic of Gandalf is relatively consistent. He doesn't really do anything that makes you question the story. Neither is anything that Miyazaki is doing in his movies, in Spirited Away here, in the world building, making you question Miyazaki's story, like the writer's hand. It's not the world building here is like good world building is essentially, or well, bad world building is when you look at a thing and you're questioning the writer's like the authorial hand, right? Um, you most typically though you see this when it comes to character work, where a character will do a thing and you'll wonder why did the character do that? Why did the author have the character do that? That's a good sign that the character did do something that will out of character, um, so that the plot could move on, which is indicative of a failing in the on the authorial part. Um, so like, but I don't think Miyazaki has done nothing that's been presented anyway within Spirited Away so far that he has provided has made me really like it just feels all internally consistent, which means it's following its own internal rules, which makes it a hard world build. Unless I could be entirely misunderstanding the argument Hello Future Me is making here, which is entirely possible. For that I do apologize, but just the way I am interpreting his wording, this is what I'm getting out of it.
An interviewer told Hayao Miyazaki that what strikes me about Spirited Away compared to your previous films is a real freedom of the author, a feeling that you can take the film and the story anywhere you wish, independent of logic even. In reply, he said this: "Everybody can make a film with logic, but my way is to not use logic. At a certain moment in that process, the lid is opened and very different ideas and visions are liberated. I should not handle a scene in a certain way for the sake of the audience. For instance, what for me constitutes the end of the film is the scene in which Shiro takes the train all by herself. I remember the first time I took a train alone and what my feelings were at the time. To bring those feelings across in the scene, it was important to not have a view through the window of the train, like mountains or a forest, because they are so focused on the ride itself. It's while working on that scene that I realized that I work in a non-conscious way. There are more profound things than simply logic that guide the creation of the story." These more profound things, as he puts it, are exactly what soft world building aims to capture and harness. Miyazaki is known for having an incredible grasp of the themes and emotional thread of his stories, and it's those that come through vividly in the world building and grip us, never letting
Which then, I don't like. Again, I'm gonna keep saying it. Like that makes it hard world building then, because in the process of being internally consistent with the theme that you are trying to get across, you are still going to be visually consistent and in a way logically consistent with how the world functions.
go. I want to be clear though here. Software building is a different method here
Okay, now he's gonna. Okay.
that prioritizes different things to hard world building. That's the difference. It's not an inherently better method, which is a mistake I do not want you to make. See, it's the massive gaps that Miyazaki leaves in the viewer's knowledge of the way this world works that creates an otherworldly, mysterious, and foreign feeling to the world of Spirited Away. Where The Lord of the Rings drags us in through explicit depth in the economic, cultural, and political details of Middle-earth,
Not really the economic. Tolkien doesn't really.
Spirited Away has imagined depth that comes from the viewer or reader themselves wanting to know more. It's a place full of questions. Telling the viewer explicitly just what all of this means would detract from that
Okay, yeah, I definitely think. I think in the writing of this script here, I think obviously using Lord of the Rings is a perfect example for what he wants to get across as hard world building. But I think for me, I think the argument is falling short because Lord of the Rings and Spirit Away in particular are very different, you know, forms of storytelling, right? Because of course, even looking at Lord of the Rings just from the movie standpoint, it is still coming from a book, and Spirit Away is not coming from. As far as I'm aware, I don't think Spirit Away is an adaptation of a book. I think it's an entirely um, Miyazaki creation. Um, so like, I don't know. Again, I think this argument would be better made if he was comparing it to another um, a film from a different studio that does do hard world building. And I'm trying to think of a good fantasy example that did not come from a that is not a book adaptation. And so I can understand like that's where this kind of is a tough, extremely tough script and video to make because I'm sure he was I wouldn't be surprised if he was trying to find some other film that gets a hard world build across in the visual medium without coming from a book, and maybe he just could not find it, which totally understandable. Um, but for me, as the video is and what's being presented, the argument is just falling short because what I'm just constantly thinking about is, well, Lord of the Rings is a book and Spirited Away is a movie. They're entirely different forms of storytelling. So, right, what they can get away with, what they get across, and what they can say are entirely, different.
enchanting, otherworldly feeling of the spirit world, especially when the story is very intentionally framed from the perspective of a 10-year-old child. That feeling of being
I think actually what he should have done maybe is use hard world building versus soft world building, comparing Studio Ghibli here to Avatar: The Last Airbender, because Avatar: The Last Airbender is, um, yeah, actually he should have done. Maybe he gets into it later, because we still have over 10 minutes of the original video. But right, like Avatar: The Last Airbender has a world very much set into at least the original series is very much a series based on the world building is very centered around like colonialism and stuff like that. But we do see like we understand very well the rules of the world. And typically when we have a question regarding the world, it does get answered, except for really the questions about the spirit world. Those in some ways do get answered. And I think actually if he had used that first as a example of hard world building instead of Lord of the Rings, I think I would have grasped what he was arguing. Because now that I am talking about it and speaking openly about the world building differences from Avatar to Studio Ghibli's Spirited Away, I think I am starting to see the difference between hard world building versus soft world building. Um, uh, so, okay.
Lost being spirited away is crucial to the tonal atmosphere of the story. The soft world building here makes the story more immersive by putting that atmospheric feeling first, without it being wholly logical. If hard world building is a world that immerses us through consciously using concrete rules, consistency, and transparency to create a sense of grounded realism and depth, then soft world building immerses us through consciously using the unknown, flexible rules, and the reader's imaginative involvement to give depth and otherworldliness.
But again, you still have to be entirely consistent with it. Like this part here, the consistency is the part where I am struggling to follow and agree with the argument Hello Future Me is making, because that right there, even in a soft world build, soft magic systems need to be internally consistent. They you cannot push them so far and pull something like completely out of your ass and not expect the audience to like lose something.
This could be on the level that you choose as a world builder to not have all of the answers, to just not know. Or you could withhold the answers that you do have for effect intentionally. There are two ends of a spectrum.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't think I'm. He's not. He's not convincing me so far.
Hard
with
and
this.
soft here, though the methods can be used together in crafting a fictional world. Other examples of stories at the softer end of the spectrum include Boon Jong-ho's Snowpiercer and Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, both of which have a profound disregard for logic.
But now he is starting to bring in other books, other mediums, other visual and things that are just solely visual mediums or originated as visual mediums. Star Wars. Okay.
As Nebula-winning sci-fi author Nancy Kress puts it, even the hardest sci-fi involves some speculation, or else it would not be science fiction. The first real strength of soft world building is it arguably gives you more creative freedom, because the story is not constantly justifying itself to the viewer. Howl's Moving Castle, Spirited Away, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind could have whales flying through the sky midway through the film if Miyazaki wanted, and the film would be no less for it. We wouldn't think so. Miyazaki's stories are so constantly full of unexplained, strange moments, like the bug-style planes in Castle in the Sky, the hopping lantern in Spirited Away. Even if he does have answers to these questions, he never gives them to us, and intentionally so, and none of his worlds are worse off for it. It's just a thing that happens and adds something to the story on a different level, allowing itself to be...
That's what happens in, like, every story, I feel like.
Strange, to be unique, to be wholly outside the bounds of our usual rules without justification, creates that enchanting feeling that Ghibli films seem to have.
But, like, elves are immortal beings, that's an otherworldly thing, and we don't understand, we don't really know unless you read, like, the Silmarillion, you don't know the elves. Like, you don't know really what they are. Like, I don't think it's explained what is happening with the elves in Lord of the Rings. You know, they are very much an otherworldly, ethereal sort of thing, especially when you first meet the elves, when Frodo sees them, I think a group of wood elves or something going to the Grey Havens or something. They're passing by the Shire or something like that. They are very otherworldly, very, in my eyes, I guess you would say Studio Ghibli-y, right? Like, so...
But it also means, and this is a really important point, that the world is flexible enough to adapt to create settings and obstacles needed to tell the story however you want, rather than fitting the story to an established world. This is what we see in perhaps the most famous example of a soft world build story ever, the Harry Potter series. J.K. Rowling has discussed how world-building elements were added with each book as she wrote them, like the Department of Mysteries and the Order of the Phoenix, all to better support Harry's emotional arc. That was only possible because she left so much room for possibility and strangeness in her world. Even within a single book, that flexibility is really useful. A second strength is that soft world-building stories also don't tend to struggle as much from pacing lulls in the first and second acts, because they spend so little time delivering exposition.
Now he's getting to the part of where I can see the difference between the hard world building versus the soft world building. Now he is getting to what I think is actually the crux of the argument here for the existence of this differentiation. Pacing and really how involved the world building is. I do think maybe perhaps there could be a workshop here for a better term than hard world building versus soft world building, because I don't think it quite conveys what I think Hello Future Me is trying to argue it conveys here, right? But like in the example of like, right, Tolkien versus J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, right, is very much each book essentially has its own self-contained rules. Going like over the whole course of the series, the rules are not consistent, but internally inside of each individual book along in the series, the rules are consistent because they are there to serve the narrative that the author is trying to tell. Whereas Tolkien was very anal about his world building, and he wanted it consistent throughout every single book that he wrote. Hence why he did not release that many things, because he was a perfectionist about it. He did not want to release it until like he felt it was good enough. And hell, even after releasing Lord of the Rings, he was still like, I could have done better or whatever, right? There were still things he was not happy with in Lord of the Rings, despite Lord of the Rings being really fucking good and very good in terms of its world building and consistent with it and whatnot and whatever. And yeah, that pacing does show, right? You don't really have to worry about like explaining anything. Whereas Lord of the Rings, right? I do not like the Fellowship of the Ring book because I do think Tolkien does do a very poor job with establishing the world. He does it in a very, I think, boring way, in my opinion. Don't get mad at me. I think the Council of Rivendell, the Council of Elrond, in which we get essentially it's a massive chapter of a lore dump, is quite frankly a terrible chapter. I do not enjoy it. It is boring. It is just info dump on info dump. But right, what does it do? It does later serve a purpose to help the overall story, right? Because we are getting a deeper understanding of the world, and things that are important later on at the cost of the pacing of the story. And it works for Lord of the Rings because Tolkien made that it's inherently important to the story being told, right? That understanding enhances the story at a later point. It is just a slog to get through at first. All right, then things like Harry Potter. Harry Potter would get dragged down if it had been written in the style of Lord of the Rings. If the author had tried to talk about like the world building of Hogwarts or whatever and tried to maintain that as consistently throughout the entire series, I don't think it would have been that could have hurt the likability of the series from in the 90s, right? Because that would have been antithetical, I think would perhaps be the right word to use here, to the story being told.
In watching Spirited Away, the only real moments of exposition early in the story include Haku telling Shishiro what happens to humans in the spirit world, and the vow that Yubaba took to give anyone a job, both of which are fleeting moments. This is a marked strength compared to hard world-built novels, which sometimes struggle with pacing because we need to understand so much of the world for the story to work, so we spend more time on it. It's because of this that's...
Okay, now I am starting to agree with the argument that he is making, especially because he is also bringing in examples that, more wider examples than just keeping it self-contained to Lord of the Rings and Studio and Spirited Away.
Soft world building excels at character-driven stories. In Kiki's delivery service, virtually
Oh, I think I fundamentally disagree with that. Cause like, I mean, yeah, I can see why that would be. I can see it. I disagree with it though, but maybe that's just like, obviously that's my perspective on storytelling. I do think that like, um, a character like a hard world build, I connect more so with the characters in a hard world build story than in a soft world build story because I understand the world in which they come from way better. And so I feel like I can connect more with the characters in that sense.
nothing is communicated about how this world works, where almost every town or city has its own witch with powers like foresight and flight. These would change a lot of things. But this is because it doesn't matter for the story. Nothing in Kiki's struggles or decisions.
And now he's getting back to the point where I disagree with because he's I feel like he's talking about things that just like would not get explained even in a hard world build if the in my opinion if the author is a good storyteller. They are not going to spend time on things that are not intrinsically important into conveying the story.
Come from interacting with those world building elements. It's all about how she wants to prove herself. She works incredibly hard, then burns out and has to learn to let herself rest. We can spend all of our time on that meaningful, personal, character driven story. I think J.K. Rowling really nicely captures a third strength of soft world building in saying that those characters belong to the readers as well as to me.
This video was obviously made before she went off the deep end.
And each has their own life in the heads of those who have read them. Sometimes the inner lives of characters, as imagined by readers, are not what I imagined
Remember,
for
this
them.
is a J.K.
But the joy
Rowling
of books
page.
is that we all make our own mental cast. While this is still true for hard world building to an extent, this is where soft world building excels as well. Where hard world building means we dictate to the reader or viewer what the world is like, soft world building invites them to give their own input, consciously and subconsciously, making it an imaginative exercise as they read or watch. And that's fun. That is immersive. It's literally you putting yourself into the world. That's because world building is not just about the reader understanding the world, which is a mistake a lot of people seem to make. World building is about crafting an atmosphere, a tone, a mood in your fictional piece. All of these constitute immersion just as much, if not more, than detail. You can, of course, still create these things with hard world building, absolutely, but it's a different method with usually different results. So it depends what you want. You can still create a grim dark world with soft world building, but that might come from a sensation of love.
What game is? I'm assuming this is a game. What game?
Craftian powers bearing down on the populace, rather than deep knowledge of just how little food and water there is available. The crucial thing is this. While hard world building stories can absolutely have a lot of depth, Tolkien, once again, is renowned for this. The fewer requirements to rationalize soft world building choices means you can prioritize and be more flexible with that meaning that you want to imbue your world with.
Yeah, he's gone back to the argument that I'm I fundamentally disagree with here. I think if I'm understanding him correctly, I disagree entirely with this because, right, like this world building is, right, while it is exceptionally detailed, it is consistent with its with its purpose, tonally, emotionally, what have you, all of those words he was saying, atmospherically, right? They are all, it serves that same exact purpose. Every story Tolkien's world building does the same exact thing. George R. R. Martin's world building does the same exact thing. But of course, I cannot say for certain on George R. R. Martin's world building because his story is not yet complete. So I feel like we cannot really necessarily speak on the world building and how it services the story entirely yet in terms of its themes and whatnot. But like the world build, like if specifically though, if we look at House of Fire and Blood, the story of the Dance of the Dragons, and compare it to the story happening in A Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, and we also look at the wider story in the Fire and Blood book outside of Dance of the Dragons, in which we look specifically at how women are treated and written about by the Maester of Fire, the writer of Fire and Blood. We see that one of his themes, world building themes, that he is using the history to deepen this theme that he is tackling within his world, the theme of sexism, of how women are targeted, are violently oppressed in a feudalistic patriarchal society. Right? That is an inherent theme of George's work. He's also anti-war. And you see that come through with Fire and Blood, the Dance of the Dragons, and how it leads to a decline, right? It's like, yeah, again, I find myself here fundamentally disagreeing with Hello Future Me's
Harry Potter
argument.
series is full of some of the most bizarre and incoherent world building I have ever seen, and I love it. From the way money works in inconceivable exchange rates to the use of freely available love potions among children. Yeah, but the Wizarding World was not created to immerse through grounded detail and intricate, consistent rules, but to immerse through a feeling of whimsy and opportunity, and to mirror the oddball characters of the Wizarding World, making it feel like the world and the characters all fit together really nicely. All of this creates a light-hearted atmosphere that is slowly lost as the books go on and grow darker. This is why perhaps the strangest things in the Wizarding world building are mentioned in the first 4 books, before Voldemort's return to power in the Goblet of Fire. And this is also perhaps why J.K. Rowling's repeated clarifications of how her world works fall flat. That wizards just crap on the floor and magic it. Dumbledore's long-lost magical Hermione and Ron had a troubled marriage. Cedric Diggory was a Nagini is an Indonesian. Yeah, and only one of those was a lie. See, it's trying to rationalize soft world building that was never meant to be rationalized. Yep. The result is that the answers just feel off, like random conclusions, meaning you don't gain that immersion through detail like we do with Middle-earth, and you dispel much of the magical atmosphere by clarifying these things. It also undermines the reader's involvement by dictating to them parts of the story they were previously encouraged to imagine. Though I don't necessarily think that people were wondering how wizards went to the bathroom in the 1800s. At all. Yeah. The bottom line is this. When world building, you don't need to feel compelled to justify everything you create, especially not things that are irrelevant to setup and payoff. Things can just be bizarre, strange, or even nonsensical, provided the reader sees that more profound, as Miyazaki puts it, meaning. To ask questions, to create a particular atmosphere, vision, or characterization for your world, all of which are important for immersion too.
But again, that is exactly what the world building in Lord of the Rings is doing. Every world build, like this is the purpose of every single world build. Every single one. This is the purpose of it. Like, because you cannot make a world as diverse as our world. So what you have to do is you have to focus down on it and have it be focused on like what am I trying? What is the purpose here of this story that I want to tell? Right? Tolkien's was on the like changing of language, of culture over the course of thousands of years, right? And he just had like epic stories to tell within those thousands of years. You know, George R. R. Martin's world is one on speaking out like the is about showcasing like how unfairly women are treated in patriarchal and in patriarchal societies. That like whether or not you agree or disagree on the way he is tackling said theme is unimportant. That that is the one of the major themes of his world building that he is doing. Whether he is succeeding in that or not is not for me to say. But that is his goal, his narrative purpose with most of his world building. Um, and a lot of his world building is also about being anti-war, being against, the consolidation of power in the few, right? That is his story. So again, I
Because
just can't find
ultimately,
myself to agree
viewers
with the
of
arguments being
Spirited
made here.
Away, Kiki's Delivery Service, and Howl's Moving Castle don't need to understand all of those things to follow the character's story. That is the thread we follow. Now, none of this is to say that having strange or bizarre world building will work and achieve these things. Nothing guarantees your readers will see it the same way you do, and you may just end up with bad, illogical, weird world building that no one can see themselves in. However, if you want to try soft world building as an experiment, then find a character driven story you want to tell and figure out what lore is absolutely essential for the reader to understand about your world, like that Yubaba took an oath to give a job to everyone who asks. Then, build the rest of your world with those more profound things in mind, using whatever bizarre, strange, or otherworldly imagery and setting you like that fits that atmosphere, tone, character, and meaning that you want to convey. Just see how it pans out. You might like it, and others might too. This is just a thing, a theory that I find interesting in how we make fiction. Like with everything else, there are trends in the way we make art, and sometimes it's useful and interesting to question why those trends are the way they are. Ultimately, it is absolutely best that you
Oh,
do it however the way you want, but this is a fun intellectual exercise. And hey, if you want to talk more about this sort of stuff, then I would love to have you join us over on the Patreon
okay, so he's done with the essay. That was hard world building versus soft world building, a study of Studio Ghibli by Hello Future Me. I think ultimately I came away disagreeing with any sort of differentiation here. For the most part, there was a bit there where I think I do disagree. I do agree with him and what he was getting across, but I think overall, at least when applied to Studio Ghibli, I do disagree because I don't know. It's just like they are they feel consistent to me in their internal world building and logic. It's just that I don't know. I don't know how to phrase it off the top of my head here. But yeah, I do find myself just disagreeing, unfortunately. Still a really good video, really compelling. I think I think to get right, like if you make an essay video on something like this where you are arguing for something like this, to then elicit a response from someone where they do disagree and that they can actually like vocalize their disagreements like I have been for 40 minutes here. I do think that means you have written a good essay and you have made a good argument. I just find myself disagreeing with it. How many people will watch this video and actually watch me say this? I don't know. Hopefully not too many people get fucking butthurt over me disagreeing with Hello Future Me. Um, um, usually it's in usually I only deal with assholes in like my Dark Soul in my From Software and Warhammer reactions. I've not had really anyone else be dicks about my disagreements with storytelling in any other of my reactions. So I don't expect it, but I am prepared to get some comments of people that just do not listen to my argument, my side of things, my perspective on the argument here. But anyways, yapping done. I hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as I did. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.